here today is a really cool repair. There was a plumbing leak and they didn't really know where it was, so they just cut this hole. I think it looks really nice. It's kind of like a work of art, but they don't want it there anymore, so I'm going to fix it. So it's interesting because here's your ceiling joist here, and there's another ceiling joist here. I'm not going to enlarge this to find the other ceiling joist. I'm going to kind of float this. It's going to be a real easy fix. I'm going to make quick work of it. But I'm going to start out by taking a few measurements, because I actually want to float this just a little bit past that ceiling joist, which is right here. So I'm going to just go, I think 23 or 24 inches will be good. And then we don't need to make it too much larger this way. Maybe 24 by 20 inches. I've got a piece of drywall, 24 by 20. I've just got a few reference lines along this edge and one here. And I'm just gonna hold this against the ceiling and trace it. So this is the edge, putting X on this and an X here, so I'll know how to orient it again later. I'm just holding it up to the few little marks I have here. And that's where I want it, so I'm just going to draw around the edges. And there you go. I haven't overly enlarged it, just enough to get rid of the damaged area here. But as you can see, this line here is not on a joist, and same thing over here. But let's cut that out and see what we've got. Take my utility saw and cut around this. I'm not going to stick the saw, this is probably like a 6-inch blade, I'm not going to stick it up in there 6 inches because I'm afraid of possibility of hitting wires or pipes. So I'm just going to cut it, but I'm not going to push it up real far, so I want to be careful. There we go. I don't know how all that got up in there, but. Okay, so now you can see that what I meant by this edge being floating. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a piece of furring strip to put above here, and here, and along that edge. And I still will attach to the joists, but it'll be easier to hide because I'm not actually putting their seams on the floor joists. Okay, so I just got a few nails I'm pulling out of this ceiling, but I did want to mention that I guess I wasn't thinking, I just figured I'm removing a piece of drywall. It turns out this is an older house, and you can see that the drywall was covered with construction debris and who knows what else, but so I regret not having a dust mask on. I really should have had a mask on when I was cutting this out. But like I said, I didn't realize, yeah, I'm actually coughing now. I didn't realize there was going to be that much debris up there. So next time, or if you're doing this, make sure you wear a dust mask. Put some furring strips across. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to get a length. See, this is 20 inches. I'm going to cut a 24-inch furring for up in there. And up in here I have this floor bracing, but it's not going to be anyway. So I'm going to cut two 24-inch pieces of furring strip, and that's going to be what I attach along each edge. What I'm doing is, these are actually more than 24 inches long. This is the length I had in my van, so it doesn't matter. I'm just putting it up in there. And see, what this gets attached to is the drywall. So I'm going to attach right through the drywall into this furring strip. I'm just using 1 1/4 screws, and I'm going through the drywall right into the furring. Now later when I attach the patch to this, it will be nice and solid. And because it's essentially floating, it's going to be a much flatter repair. Like if I cut it on the center of this joist, it wouldn't be as flat. It just wouldn't. It tends to be more difficult to hide if you attach right to the ceiling joists. What I'm using here is just an impact driver, but I have a bit on the end of it, an attachment it converts any screw gun to a drywall screw gun because it's got a little clutch in it and it's adjustable. It's actually called the dimpler, and this is the adjustable dimpler. It allows me to set the screw to the exact depth that I want, and it works great with an impact driver. All right, I'm all set to put this in place. I've pre-cut a hole for the wire, so that's the first thing I'm going to do is attempt to poke the wire through this hole. There we go. So my furring strip is behind here. These screws here mark the location of the ceiling joists. So now I'm just going to screw it in place. Okay, so that's all the fasteners I'm going to be putting in. The other little thing I like to do when I'm looking at this now is you can see along these edges of where I cut the old drywall out, it's kind of burred up a little bit. I'm going to take my knife and I'm just going to remove, I'm just going to cut it back a little bit just to get rid of the damaged areas. Well, not damaged areas, get rid of that little fuzz that I created when I cut the damaged area out. And I do have a little bit of a gap around here. I'm going to address that as I tape it. All right, this is the tape I'm going to use to fix all the seams here. It's a fiberglass mesh tape. It's extra wide, it's extra strong. It's a fiber tape, extra strength. I like it because of the strength, but you'll notice a little while ago I mentioned that there are some gaps here. I'm not pre-filling them because it's a mesh tape. I'm going to be able to force compound through the tape and into those cracks later when I go to coat it. So the first step here is applying the tape over the seams. One interesting thing that I do, I can show you right here, is I don't lap the tape. Like, I start over here, then where it butts into this other tape, I'm not going to just cut it long, I'm going to cut it right along that edge. So in other words, I haven't lapped it. And that helps minimize the size of the bump. I know that's not, crazy thickness, but every little bit helps when you're trying to hide a repair in the middle of somebody's ceiling. So there you go, all the tape is in place. Now, because this is a repair, I want to get as much done as I can today. So I'm not going to just use a regular all-purpose compound to do the repair, at least to embed the tape, I should say. I'm going to use a setting compound. All the manufacturers make their own version. This happens to be a USG. It's an Easy Sand 20. The 20, all of them have numbers on it. This one's 20, which means it's going to set up in about 20 minutes. So this sets up chemically. So I'm going to apply this, a pretty heavy coat right away, maybe take a coffee break, and then it'll be set up, and I can put my fill coat over this today. So I'm saving a whole trip by using this compound. Because it only has a working time of 20 minutes, I'm not going to mix up more than I can handle in 20 minutes. And I'm not going to mix it up in a bucket, I'm going to mix it up in my pan. Okay, I'm going to mix up the setting compound. I already have the water in my pan. You don't put the dry compound in first, you always put the water in first. And I'm just going to sprinkle it in because I want to mix it a little loose to start with, and then add compound as I need it. Now I have this little attachment that I put on my screw gun here, and that just stirs it up real nice. That's good. That's what I was hoping for. Nice loose mix to start with. Now I can better gauge how much more I have to add. Because I want the consistency to be fairly thick. Fairly thick, but probably not that thick. I'm gonna add a little bit more water to it. This is probably, you're probably thinking, well, that's more than he's gonna need. But because it's a setting compound, I'm gonna pre-fill, I'm gonna push compound through the tape into those cracks, and then I'm gonna put a fairly heavy coat over it right away. Because it sets up chemically, so, and it doesn't shrink much either because it's doesn't air dry. The compound is pretty thick. That's going to make it easier to work with. It's not going to be dripping all over the place. I'm applying it with my 6-inch taping knife. So the first thing I'm going to do is I put a little bit of compound on my knife, and I'm going to force it through, forcing it right through the tape. Right into that gap, filling that gap. Same thing around the whole edge. I'm going to do this before I even start to try to conceal the tape. Okay, so I have the compound forced through the tape. Now I'm just going to start applying it to start concealing it. As luck would have it, the repair, the patch that I put in here is actually a little lower, a little bit raised up, which is good. That's going to make it a little easier to hide. So I really want to fill the center and just taper the edges out a little bit. So that's all I'm going to try and do right now. Is put the compound on and start hiding the tape. Start filling the center and feathering it out. And this looks a little ragged right now because I'm just applying the compound. In a minute I'm going to smooth it out and get it looking a lot better. The key thing you want to remember is you don't want to build the compound up too much along the tape, because that's pretty much your highest spot. But you also don't want to be afraid of putting enough compound on. I see a lot of people that do repairs, and I often say, oh, if they just put one more coat on it, it would look a lot better. Because they just don't widen it out enough. They just don't feather it in well enough. So I'm putting a lot of compound on right now, and once I start smoothing it out, you'll see what I mean about keeping it thin along the tape and widening it out, not being afraid to widen it out. Okay, so let's see what happens if I try to start smooth this out. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna keep my edges feathered in. So this outside edge, definitely gonna wanna keep that feathered in nice and tight. And I'm just gonna take my knife, start smoothing it in. What makes this fairly easy for me to do is the fact that the compound is not too thin. If you're having a hard time accomplishing what I'm doing, one of the problems could be your compound is just too thin. Of course, too thick would be not good either, but it wouldn't be as bad as being too thin. There, so I'm pretty happy with that. I've got it nicely feathered. The edges are not thick and jagged. I've concealed the tape, but I can actually, if I look close enough, I can actually see the tape slightly, which means I haven't built it up too much. Keep in mind, I'm gonna have 2 more coats on this. In about 15 minutes, when this sets up, I'm gonna put a fill coat over it, and then tomorrow when this is dry, I'm gonna come in and put my finish coat over it. So that's a pretty good job for my first coat. This is the compound I'm going to be using for the fill coat. I switched from a setting compound to a drying type compound. And what I like to use is the lightweight. This is USG +3. It's a lighter weight compound. It dries quickly, it sands easily, and it doesn't shrink a lot. This is what I'm going to be using for the fill coat. I haven't even mixed it because I don't want it to be too thin. I haven't added any water. Actually, I haven't even stirred it up. So that's a pretty thick consistency, but that's what I want. If it's too thin, it's going to be more difficult to blend in. So this is what I'm going to give it a try with. So it's really only been about 20 minutes, and you can see that the compound is set up. It's already pretty hard. So now my plan here is to feather it out wider and to fill this void in. So I'm going to start out by just applying a generous amount of compound. Like I said, I'm going to enlarge it a little bit, so I'm going a little further out. I'm just using my 6-inch knife to apply it. I could go with a wider knife to apply the compound, but I find the 6-inch gives me a little bit more control, and I can kind of feel things out a little bit as I'm applying it. By that I mean, if I feel a little bit of a bump or raised area that I need to deal with. So I've got some on there. I'm gonna get a little bit more before I even start smoothing it out. All right, I have quite a bit of compound on there now. Now I'm going to just start smoothing that out. And I'm going to use a wider knife. This is a 12-inch taping knife. This is what I'm going to be smoothing it out with. I'm not applying the compound with it. By that, I'll show you what I mean. When I'm smoothing out compound, I keep the knife pretty flat. If I'm trying to remove compound, I keep it more straight up and down. So one of my rules always is start out by feathering out the edges. So I don't have any compound on the knife. I'm just going to apply a lot of pressure to the outside of this 12-inch knife and feather that edge right in. So that's what I'm going to do first. So I'm keeping it tight against that edge. So now I'm happy with that. Now I'm just going to start smoothing it out. Just pulling the knife across the surface. And I just pulled it across 3 or 4 times, and I've only removed the minimal amount of joint compound. So I'm pretty happy with the amount of compound I had on there initially. So now it's just a matter of keeping those edges feathered in and smoothing out the compound. All the while keeping in mind that I'm not building it up too thick along the actual repaired edges. One thing I just wanted to mention, when I'm smoothing, let's say I want to start smoothing this area here. I don't start right on the compound. I'll start with my knife off the compound. In other words, I reach beyond it, I pull gently across it, and then pull it right off the other edge. That eliminates tool marks. Those stop and start tool marks that are difficult to get rid of. So I'm always starting off the compound and then pulling it right to the other edge. Sometimes it's hard to see what you're doing when you're right up next to it. So get down and take a look at it. I'm actually pretty happy with that. I know I've got it built up heavy enough along the center, and I've got the edges feathered out nice and wide. So that's all I'm going to do today. And tomorrow when this is dry, I'm going to come back and I'm going to sand this. I'm going to use a dust extracting sander, and I'm going to, so if there's a little bit heavy here and there, it'll sand that right off flat, and then I'll get a good feel for how thick I need to apply the finish coat. So that's all I'm going to do here for today. All right, what I'm going to do now is, it's the next day, of course, the joint compound is all nice and dry, and I'm going to sand it before I put my finish coat on it. And I'm using a dust control sander. This is a really complicated tool. I think it's hooked to the vacuum, a dust extractor, so it's going to suck the dust. This works really well. It's not something the average person is going to purchase. I'm not even sure if you can rent it, but use some sort of a dust control sander. It could be something that just hooks up to the vacuum. This rotates, and really this encapsulates probably 90% of the dust or more. So that's what I'm going to do here first, and then I'm going to take a straight edge and see what kind of a bump I have, if any, that I need to deal with. So let me sand this real quick. You can see that really does capture all the dust. If I didn't have this good of a sander, I would actually isolate this area, probably drape plastic in the whole area, and maybe even put a fan in the window to exhaust some of the air, so depressurize this room a little bit. But with this sander, I really didn't need it, but dust control is really going to be important. Now, before I apply the finish coat on this ceiling, I'm going to get a straight edge. I'm going to get like a 4-foot level, just to see how flat I've got that. And the other thing I'm going to be doing today is I'm applying a finish coat, which is a relatively thin coat. And what I'm going to be using is this dust control joint compound. This helps eliminate the airborne dust. The dust particles kind of cling together, so any dust I do create falls directly down instead of floating around the room. So this works really well. And this is, I only use this for my finish coat. I didn't use it on the fill coat, just the coat that I'm really gonna be doing most of the sanding on. So that's another little precaution that I'm gonna be doing. So I'm just gonna use this level to see how flat it is. It's not too bad. It's not a bump, let's put it that way. For some reason it's recessed a little bit right here, which could be, yeah, the ceiling joists are up because I don't even have a repair here. So it's not perfectly flat to start with, but it's really not much of a bump. So I'm just gonna blend it in. I'm gonna put another layer of compound over this, leave it a little heavier in spots, but I think it's gonna be fine. All right, so I've got the compound. You can see it's pretty thick. I did not thin it down because this is a small area. I don't mind it if it's a little bit heavy, or a little bit thick, I should say. So I'm just gonna apply it. I'm widening it out just a little bit more. And apply all the compound, not over the entire patch, but most of it before I even start smoothing it out. Okay, I've got the compound applied to about half of the repaired area here. And now I'm going to start smoothing it out. I'm going to use a 12-inch knife. This is a 12-inch wide, and I have a little bit of a curve in my trowel. So this is the concave side, this is the convex side. So this is the side that I have against my ceiling, against the joint compound. And I do that because that pulls the edges away from the joint compound, so I'm less likely to leave any tool marks. But I don't really care if I do have a few tool marks because I am going to be sanding this. But of course, the less the better. So first thing I'm going to do is feather that edge in, the outside edge. So I got that in nice and tight. Now I'm just going to pull my knife across. I'm not removing all the compound because I still need to leave a little bit to get this looking good. I'm going to go over it a few times and see if I want to leave a little more or take a little more off. So basically the same thing I did when I put the fill coat on, putting the compound on and smoothing it out. I know I have a little touching up to do around where this light is going to be. So I'll probably end up with some tool marks here, but they'll be sanded away. I'm not too worried about that. There, I'm happy with that. I think a few pointers that I may have here is I did not put a real tight coat on. I actually left a fairly heavy coat on. In other words, I didn't put it on and take it right back off. But I got it smooth. I do have some tool marks and little imperfections. But the key here is I wanted to put it on heavy enough because tomorrow I'm going to sand, and I'm going to sand away anything that's excess here. But if I did the opposite and left exactly what I thought I needed, I might have some shadowing, because I think a lot of repairs people do, it ends up flashing through later because they didn't really put enough compound on. They were afraid to enlarge it. Because if you remember, this hole was really only maybe an 18-inch diameter hole. And now I probably have this at least 30 or 40 inches in diameter. So that's how big I had to make it in order to hide this hole and blend it into the ceiling, because it's a very visible spot in this ceiling. So that's it for today. And tomorrow I'm just going to sand this out and be done. Good.